Welcome to the Mental Advantage Podcast. Whether you're an athlete trying to perform at your best when it counts the most, a coach or business leader trying to get more out of your team, or someone looking for more personal growth, this is the place for you. This podcast is your map to guide you to the right mindset, systems, and strategies you need to become the best version of yourself. And now, here's John Cullen and Brandon Allen.
All right, welcome to the Mental Advantage Podcast. Brandon, we got another great guest on today, Devi Jags. Devi Jags is what she's kind of goes by on a lot of her social media. You'll hear her talk about that. Came on our radar because of an article she wrote in the Washington Post that was called "There's a Mental Health Crisis in College Sports." Mm-hmm. I know it firsthand, and that'll definitely get your attention, won't it?
It will. And, it comes on the tail end of, just a tragic couple of weeks, or really, I mean, anytime any student or young person, takes their life, or anybody for that matter, it's tragic. It's one of those things that's a little bewildering. You're trying to understand why. But there's a lot of pressure, that gets put on to kids now, regardless of whether they're an athlete or not. There's just a lot of external pressure put on, and social media, doesn't help. I mean, there's just so much influence now in people's lives that, quite frankly, doesn't need to be there, and it doesn't help with the overall mental health of people nowadays.
Yeah, and I think you hit on a really big topic there that we talk a lot about athletes on this show, but this problem of pressure, as you mentioned, is something that stretches beyond athletics into the youth. I jokingly will say about, when you have people who in your life, and everybody does, who find themselves always in a comparative model with you, and you don't realize it. And I always jokingly say they're keeping score of a game I'm not even playing.
Right.
But the reality of it is, I think that some of this pressure that is put on kids, young adults today, is a direct result of a game that parents and adults are playing, that are keeping score of, I should say, that nobody else is playing. Like, it's this drive to be, Facebook has done this, Twitter has done this, Instagram has done this, or whatever. It's like this, look at my kid, look at what they've done, look at what they've been able to accomplish, or whatever. And it becomes this like race to the finish line, and worried about placement, when the reality of it is, it truly is, as the old saying goes, the journey and not the destination. Like, I think so many people miss out on their moments that they could be spending with their kids, that the journey they could be walking in life with their young adults, whether it's their kids or somebody else's kids or nieces and nephews, whatever the case may be, if they would quit being so caught up in the ultimate results or what the perceptions, I should say, that everybody else has on them.
For sure. And I think, the result, and we talk about all the time, is not the thing here. It's just not. The result for, as a parent, man, I think the result that you would hope that they could look back on their life and say, you know what, it was enriching. It fulfilled me. I knew I was loved. I had this, I had that. And I don't, as a parent, I don't think that I'm looking back hoping that my kids feel like, they had a great basketball career, or they were amazing in student council, or whatever it is. Like, those are just things, right? And we talk about it a lot about, I'm not Brandon, the baseball player, or coach, or whatever. This is one of the things that I do. Like, I'm a father of 3 that I love immensely. And I'm, I've got these interests and that interests. And there are those things that ground you, and those things that you kind of build your life around. And then there's the other things. And, I do agree, John. I think people tend to give a lot more credit to those things that just really don't matter, because they think that other people value them.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, nobody cares. I can tell you, and again, this is just my perspective. Never sat around a table with dinner with the kids and talked about somebody else's accomplishments that I saw on Facebook that I really wish they would do too. It just doesn't happen.
Yeah. Yeah. It's the sad part for me and you both as fathers is, when you read these, I'm thinking of 3 stories that all came around the same time. Katie Meyer from Stanford University, the goalkeeper, Sarah Schultze from Wisconsin track, and then of course a little closer to home for me is that Lauren Burnett at James Madison University, 20 years old. I forget what Katie Meyer's age was, but it was young. And I'm thinking to myself, unfortunately, it takes these type of situations or happenings to make everyone pause for a second. And they're like, oh my gosh, like, wow, there is a lot of pressure that we're putting on these kids. And there is a lot of pressure that the athletes have to go through and the students have to go through. And everybody kind of comes together for a little bit. And they're like, oh, I just wish we could all understand that we didn't mean to put that kind of pressure on you. We're you don't have to be this great softball player. You don't have to be this great soccer player on top of being a great student and all this other stuff. We just care about you. But you know what? Then 2 weeks, 3 weeks goes by and it's lost, and we're right back into the same cycle.
If not worse, right? Because I look back and you think about another tragic event. And so like you take suicide, and now all of a sudden that's our common enemy, right? We're all against it, and you and I are old enough to remember what our country looked like and felt like after 9/11. Right. And the amount of patriotism and the amount of everyone kind of picking everybody up. And there was sympathy and empathy and there was a direction and there was just this patriotism and commonality.
Yeah.
Right. Because we all had at that time, there was this single enemy that everybody, no political affiliation aside, everything got pushed aside.
Yep.
Right.
It's us against them.
It's us against them. And really it was us dusting, like literally and proverbially dusting ourselves off and being like, you know what, this doesn't stop. But you know what, John, as tragic as that was, it didn't last. Right. And we're more divided now than we've ever been.
Ever before. I agree.
And so you look back on it and go, well, how does this happen? And it's these echo chambers that social media, provides. It's these algorithms that continue to put these thoughts, whether they're positive or negative. When you get in that loop, it's all that you see on social media. And so as an athlete, as a kid today, if you don't have the wisdom, and I mean that from truly what, like if you don't have that experience in your back pocket to where you can kind of pull yourself out of that nosedive and know that there's help and know that the things that you're worried about, you're looking for a permanent fix to a temporary solution.
Right.
Right. I mean, it is the ultimate, this too shall pass. This too shall pass. The bad times and the good times. This too shall pass. You're not going to, it's not going to haunt you forever if you don't let it. It's not going to be the thing that dictates what your life can be if you don't let it. But you have to know that there's help. And that's really difficult right now for a lot of people, not just kids, but especially kids.
In those conversations, like you say about getting help, they're so important, is to be able to, I think sometimes people just want to be told from somebody else, it's all right. Like, it's not, this is not the end of the world. Like, this is not going to be. I read an article recently, and I can't remember where it was, or I would cite the person.
Not to interrupt you, John, but it's all right. And it's not the end of the world, but it's important to you. Like,
right.
It
feels, you got to validate.
It feels like it's the end of the world to you. Right. But if you can just continue to fight a little bit and get on the other side, you will see that there is a light at the end of the tunnel.
Right. Yeah. And this is not the final chapter. It's not where it stops.
Sure.
But this person, and I don't know if this was in Daily Stoic or where it was, but it was talking about how if we talk to others the way we, if we would talk to ourselves the way we talk to others. So in other words, like when you deal with a challenge in life, or say you lose your job, say you didn't pass the board, say you didn't, get an A on that big test or whatever. If that happened to a friend of yours, you would be so much more, kind of,
you'd be graceful. Like what can I do? How can I help?
Yeah. I mean, and you would be also explaining to them the perspective of this is not, like we just said, it's not the end of the world or whatever, but it's whenever it happens to ourselves, then we typically don't talk to ourselves the same way. That's when we get into a lot more like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do now? I can't believe this happened. This is it. All I worked for is, we don't see the opportunity that this now presents to us. We don't see what this can be as a result of, yes, I did. It's like, I always think back to when, it's like when Brian Kane was talking about how he was training for the Phoenix Marathon or whatever, Ironman. And it got postponed because of COVID, and everybody was saying to him, well, that's awful. That's horrible. And he's like, I got better physically. Like, I'm in better shape in my life. You just have to reframe some of those things.
The race is just the race. The process to get to the race is where the real enrichment becomes. And, it's interesting that we wouldn't provide that grace and understanding to ourselves. I do think there is at times that people feel like there's this, I deserve to be a victim for a little bit when something bad happens to me. And it's then what do I do? Right. And that's what's amazing with Davy is we'll hear from her how she suffered and was a victim to some really horrific stuff while she was in college, but she just didn't let that define her. And here she is, and she's doing great things.
I love the fact that and they'll hear about this, but the one thing I really love about Davy's story is there's a moment when you're listening to her story and you're thinking about you're almost showing that empathy of how powerless she must feel during all of these things. And then there's a switch that's flipped where she regains that power, and you're just like, good for her, like that. And, she comes to the conclusion in the end that, hey, I don't need this. So right. I think it was a really cool piece of that. So definitely, look up that article in the Washington Post by Devi Jags, and Devi Jags, I think actually is the way it's listed in the Washington Post, is there's a mental health crisis in college sports. I know it firsthand. And I know she ran track at Xavier University, really, really cool, interesting person. And it's one of those people that she's definitely younger than we are, but I'm so glad. Buddy, you'll understand that. Everybody's
I know. I was gonna say I don't know anymore if that's very hard for our guests, but yeah. But she was great.
Oh yeah, but I swear when you talk to her. And that's what I love about having some of these guests on. I'm like, man, this is really cool because it redeems your kind of faith in where the future's heading when we have guests like her on. So really appreciate her taking the time to join us and enjoy this conversation. Get your pen and paper ready. Here's Devi Jags. All right, welcome. So as you heard there from the introduction, we have Devi Jags. Is that how you pronounce the last name? I should have just stuck with Jags. I thought about sticking with Jags, and I thought, I'm going to go for it. So
no, it's all right. No, you were pretty spot on. Devi Jags. I go by Devi Jags across my social media and my writing. So yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Well, we can't thank you enough for joining us. Devi, as we were talking there before we started recording, I was really intrigued. We went through this stretch, it seems like a couple of weeks ago, with all of the craziness in college sports. And I mean, it's been going on for a while, but it seemed like we had just a run of situations that have come up where, we lost too many young lives all in one kind of week. And I was doing some research on the internet, and I came across somebody that had shared your article that was in the Washington Post. There's a mental health crisis in college sports. I know it firsthand. And it got me thinking right away. I was like, we need to get her on the show and talk about this, because we need to, I think, probably have more of these conversations. Wouldn't you agree?
Yes, I completely agree. And I think, I was really trying to get this article out right when we heard about the news of the tragedy of Katie Myers from Stanford, the soccer player, and then just more and more lives were lost in this month alone. And it started to become a more urgent topic, but I've been trying to push this topic out forever. I've been writing about the mental health crisis in the NCAA since I basically have been an athlete. Now being removed from it, I think I can write about it with a little bit more clarity, because I am doing a lot better. But yeah, no, being an NCAA athlete in the intensity of Division I sports in that environment, it takes a toll on you, but it's also the most coming of age years where there's a lot of pressures, a lot of hormones, and it's very difficult. And I think the intensity of performance takes that to a whole nother level.
No doubt about it. And one of the things, and just for the listeners, so Devi went to Xavier. She was a track cross-country runner. And you talk a little bit about that in the story. If you don't mind, could you kind of take the listeners back a little bit into, just maybe some of your experiences as an athlete and what really has got you as fired up about the mental health crisis as you are?
Yeah. And I think, even with the article that I shared with the Washington Post, that's only a snippet, right? So most people go to college 4 to 5 years, 5 years if they've been redshirted. And I really think my mental health issues started all the way back in high school. I didn't necessarily have the most comfortable experience becoming a cross country and track runner in high school, dealing with a lot of intensity and manipulation and power control with some of my male coaches. And I started to deteriorate in high school. So coming out of my senior year of track season, I found out that I had a stress fracture in the hip, groin, and femur, to the point where my entire femur was very close to completely breaking, to the point where I wasn't going to be able to run ever again.
Oh, wow.
So, I really felt a lack of support in high school when that injury happened, because it was right towards the end. Once they didn't need me for the championship postseason races, I really felt disposable. And that was really that was probably, I pinpoint my first and real heartbreak. So I would start out with my journey as far as I was experiencing injury and the mental turmoil with that. Go into college. I'm allowed to date for the first time. I'm allowed to go to parties for the first time. Xavier is this big basketball school. And when March Madness comes around, it is the most insane thing ever. It is like magic. It's, I always compare colleges to the mirage of a casino. Right. And so that's really what I went into. And, I was fighting for a varsity spot, really wanted to run the biggest championships, but still coming off that injury and different kind of training styles and with women, and especially women's distance running, puberty. And that took a toll on my body and the changes that I had to deal with. So freshman year, I was really already in a rough place. Didn't even know if I completely wanted to stay at Xavier. Didn't know if the training was working for me. But I was like, you know what? I came to Xavier as a student. And back then I was very running first. I was the typical type, one track type minded jock that a lot of kids are when they're going into college sports at that level. And so for some reason, I kind of reevaluated and I was like, no, I've always liked business school. I know I came here for marketing. Let me just see what else the school has to offer. So I started befriending a lot of non-athletes because we didn't have Greek life at Xavier. The athletes were Greek life. And so entering my sophomore year, I really went in with the mentality of trying to get back at it. My coach took me to a nutritionist because, at some point my freshman year, I had another stress fracture and things seemed to be off with my health. So I saw the nutritionist, but, that's also when I kind of pinpoint my journey with developing really bad body dysmorphia and eating issues. Mm-hmm. But it really took off when the summer going into sophomore year, I went back, I was on Xavier's campus and I was sexually assaulted. Mm-hmm. And, it wasn't even just the depression, anxiety that took over my body. I also was anemic. So it was a combination of so many different things. When I came back, I wasn't, myself. I was very jumpy, scared to be on campus, anemic. So I really was not running well. Mm-hmm. The person that committed the act was associated with my team. So when I went to practice, I was always thinking about it. And I kept it a secret. I didn't tell my coach and I didn't tell my parents. A couple friends knew. And luckily for them, they helped me find counseling resources that my school had, but not every school has that. Right. And, for a while I was just, kind of looming depression, didn't know my way, but it really helped me when my friends and other athletes supported me. And so what I write about in the Washington Post article is we had this event where, we would have study table hours. And so we'd have to go to study tables and do our homework. And instead of that, they had this event where all of us piled into the big room in the Ncaa Center banquet hall. And we're what are we doing here? And, you have the basketball team over in this corner. You have the swim team over in this corner. You have the track team, taking up the whole middle. And, all the different sports, we're just so associated with our different cliques. And then they, take us off guard and they're okay, split up into groups of 7 with people you don't know. And we're oh my God, people you don't know. We can't do that. And, I don't quite remember every detail, but I just remember this male speaker getting up. He was a former Division I football player, and he starts throwing all this stuff at us about like how he had anxiety to depression to the point where he wanted to commit suicide. And back then, like that was 2015, fall of 2015. I don't know. The only mental health crisis that I had heard about at that point was the runner from University of Pennsylvania. She committed suicide in Philadelphia. But other than that, like, you put a former football player up on stage talking about that. And I don't know if everyone was completely receptive to it, to be honest with you. Like you could tell from people's body language that, that they were nervous, that they might have something to say. So then he really throws another curveball at us, and he's like, okay, tell this group like something personal about you and like things that no one else knows. And mind you, we were supposed to be in groups with people that we didn't know. But of course, the crush, or what I like to call, if we really want to take it back to college, friends with benefits, is in my group. And I was like, this is not about to happen right now. And so, I say that only because although it was a student athlete event, although of course mental health is like a part of sports, I'm still a 19-year-old girl trying to figure out like romantic relationships, worrying about probably like the accounting homework that I had that I didn't know how to do that was due the next day. Like that's what my mind was back then. And with all that, that's really hard to be then focusing about Saturday's race. So yeah, that's why I put that information in there. But then this guy, he starts like spilling out lists of like, stand up if you don't like what you see when you look in the mirror in the morning. Like, stand up if you've ever like completely broke down before like a game or something. I should have stood up for every single one. Really? And I did not stand up for a single one. And some of that was because the, Friends with Benefit dude was right there. And some of it, because, you can't show your emotions in front of a Friends with Benefits. Like, what is that? But like, also, I couldn't let the world know how badly I was suffering. And then they started passing out these things of yarn. Okay. But like I said, this story is very like, there's a lot of layers to it that, there's a reason I'm writing a book rather than just articles. But they say, tie the pieces of yarn or give the pieces of yarn to 5 people that like brighten your day in your day-to-day of like your life. So I'm trying to find some of my teammates. I'm trying to find, different people from different sports teams that like we eat together in the calf, and they make my day a little bit better. And of course I'm bolting away from like any other like people that I don't want to talk to.
Hold on. Friends with Benefits doesn't get any yarn?
No, Friends with Benefits does not get yarn. But he chased me. I shouldn't say chase. But then where it gets even more complicated is I have a friend on another, how do I put it? Another revenue making sports team.
Sure.
He was a really, really, really good friend at the time. So I like go and he finds me and he goes, hey Dave, like you're my best friend. Like, thank you for always being there. And, they were younger. They were also new to the craziness of Xavier. They were part of an IT team. And so, then you have that person tie this yarn around this very necklace that later then broke this chain later that night. Then you have Friends with Benefits giving me string, and I'm overwhelmed. And I'm like, but the Friends with Benefits, when I turn to him and I'm like, okay, I also don't have any yarn left at this point. They go, one day you'll be able to talk about your story. And I'm angry. I'm completely thrown off guard and I'm angry. And fast forward, this later turns into a toxic, like, love triangle of the person that was from a really, like, prestigious team somehow gets involved in a drug deal that goes wrong and needs a gun for his protection. I am in the middle that knows, not allowed to tell anyone. I am, infatuated with another person. They're infatuated with me. It turns into a mess. I probably spent my entire college, career, if you will, healing from the trauma of that. When I reported the gun, the trauma and the way trauma compounds is a domino effect. And so the things of the sexual assault, injury, the fear that I held on that campus because I knew there was a gun. I mean, there's no other way to put it. I was scared for my life. I was scared for other people's lives because this person they started demonstrating very manipulative, violent behavior when I would not reciprocate these feelings. The way I look at it now is this person was on a revenue-making sports team. They might have acted out of desperation, but I do believe like abuse, manipulation, violence is a choice. And I think that's why I did turn to the support of Title IX. And that's when I started learning about sexual violence on college campuses, the epidemic of it. I started learning about intimate partner violence. And although this person wasn't an intimate partner, they lived down the hall from me. Like our doors were right there. Our friend groups were completely immersed. The athletic culture at Xavier was still small. You knew of people. So every day I'm walking into the Ncaa Center to practice, I'm fearing that team isn't harassing me for God knows what. I wasn't necessarily ecstatic when their coach stood in front of their team and said, "Don't talk to this girl." I was the problem. And so, I look at this differently now because, maybe I didn't know everything going on behind the scenes with the administration and the coaches and the school. But what I do know is I probably should have been the first one to know everything going on, because if anyone was directly threatened, it was me. And then in a 19-year-old's brain, those words, those actions feel highly, highly concentrated. Luckily enough for me, my coach was very understanding about the extremity of the situation. At this point, he knew what I had been through, coming into my sophomore year. And I remember he let me run a race in West Virginia, and with my fitness level, I was supposed to win my heat. And I just remember during that indoor race, being at the front, and I'm like, okay, this is why running makes everything better. If I can just get my performance to be where it needs to be, nothing else will matter. I'm going through, I don't know. I know I don't even remember if it was what race it was. It was the 3,000 or whatever it was. But I'm entering the second half of the race, and something made a thing in my brain switch and reminded me of all the stuff going back on at campus, reminded me of the fear. And I just remember my shoulders closing in. If you ever watch a track race, when people are getting tired, their shoulders close in, and my breathing just started becoming really irregular. And I don't know what place I came in. Definitely wasn't first in my heat. And he said, "Davey, you need to take a break." But I always felt like I was taking a mental break. And I don't think every college athlete gets those college mental, get those performance breaks. My coach was good in that way. But I always felt like I was letting him down. I came in with, decent times and as part of my recruiting class, right there to be right there with varsity scoring for my team. And I never did. So junior year comes around, and I'm doing better. At that point, I tried to start a business called Sparkle. Sparkle, I defined as your happiness, your passion, and self-worth, which was sometimes taken away by the traumatic event of sexual violence. And at this point, I became a little bit more of an advocate and a voice on campus. I started speaking up, which is something I wasn't able to do at the beginning of sophomore year. But then with that, people started sharing. And then all of a sudden, the campus became smaller and smaller and smaller because you knew who did what, you knew who was suffering from what. And I think at Xavier, I was probably, quote unquote, a witness to 4 Title IX cases where I was speaking in the hearing. The Title IX case is not a criminal case. They're not putting someone in jail. They're simply deciding whether the student is supposed to be suspended, expelled, or gets to stay. And it's like found guilty or not guilty. There's, to be honest, like even if they're expelled, there's no repercussions. They get expelled, they can go to another college. So I was witness to at least 4, and I knew a lot about a lot more. And I really did. I tried to be strong. I tried to be strong for those other survivors. But what happens is when you love a school so much, you start to want to hold them accountable. And I could just see Xavier with clear eyes. And I think that was really hard for me to continue being an athlete with those clear eyes. But then again, back then with Sparkle, like I wasn't allowed to talk about that I was on the track team. So now with the name, image, and likeness rule, maybe it would have been different. Maybe if I was being compensated for all the other work that I was doing on a college campus, because I was building a social media following. I was doing campaigns on the campus. Maybe it would have been different. I don't know. All I know is I got to junior year. I was back in the best, like doing the best times. My coach was like, you're in a different fitness level that I've never seen you in before. You know, I was in the gym working with my strength coach, you know, privately, just doing the extra work, but doing it because I felt strong. And there was a day in the middle of cross country season, right before postseason again. And I don't know, I was up at 6 a.m. reading Sisters of Law because I was just so curious about how the things that I experienced impacted specifically women on a larger scale. And there was never any other race that I was worrying about something else the day, like the morning of. Like the race was the priority. And that day, the race was not the priority. And when I started running, I've never wanted to stop during a race. Mind you, back in high school, when I had 3 stress fractures, continued to run a 2-mile race. Like I was the type of person that was running until my bones were breaking, because I think that's a whole nother mental health issue. But yeah, I wanted to go off the course. I was so done. And I just started essentially jogging and cheering on like the girls next to me, because all of a sudden I just did not care. And I finished and turned to one of my training partner and I said, hey, great job, because she had a great race. I go, it's time. And she's like, is it? I said, it's time. And that later that week, I told my coach. He was completely thrown off guard. But it's what I felt like I had to do, because I couldn't walk to practice one more day knowing what I knew. And it's sad. It's heartbreaking. A couple months later, I was hospitalized. Kate Fagan, actually, who's a big mental health advocate, she came to speak about Maddie, the runner who we lost to suicide. And we had a long talk. It was shortly after that I was hospitalized, because I think so much of me wanted to help others that I wasn't getting the help that I needed. And yeah, I for a few years I took, I left the team, was in, another toxic, abusive relationship. And I think that's what's hard for me to explain is when you experience this kind of like sexual trauma, data shows that it's not very uncommon to keep experiencing these types of intersections of violence because it's normalized. It was normalized on the institutional level. It was normalized in sometimes friend groups, and it was normalized even when I think about some of the things that I put up with, the behavior that I put up with in high school track. And so as a kid, it was all I knew. And so, like I said, it was a domino effect. But when I started taking care of myself, that's even when I was able to clearly write about my own self, about how I did love running. It was like, it is still my love and joy to this day. But maybe I just, like, me and the NCAA did not go together. And I don't blame the NCAA. I just, I think there's culture on college campuses. There's culture within institutions like the NCAA. And I don't think change can start until we're hearing individualized stories and picking out the commonalities of those stories and doing our part. Everyone needs to do their part to fight mental health and the various things that impact mental health. In my case, gender-based violence was what impacted my mental health. I probably have always had anxiety and depression. I probably always will. I do my part every day to fight and, work on myself. But when things like sexual violence are out of my control, it does take everyone to do their part in fighting that kind of violence.
That's great. So I've got a question. So as there's a lot of looking back and understanding that, okay, I needed to step away here, or you realized it was time, but there was always this, I'm coming back to running, right? Because it's your passion, it's your love. And as an athlete that can make it to a certain level, how would you either convince yourself, or what was it that you had inside of you that kept bringing you back to the running piece, at looking as though, okay, I'm headed back to that thing that I love, that passion that I have? Can you look back and go, well, this is what it was, and I really just needed it to be in my life, kind of a thing? Or what was it?
It's almost like a self-dependency addiction thing. Okay. Not always in the negative sense. I think, I was diagnosed with manic depression. So like that bipolar manic behavior exists in me. I personally can take it to the next level. But when your body knows that kind of trust, the ability it can take to push itself to a limit that surprises you, but also you're going to do it, you never want to lose that feeling. And I think that's what kept me. It's still to this day keeps me writing. It keeps me like wanting to like train. My body doesn't do what it does anymore, but finding ways to work with your body. Your body is like a machine. And when you learn that and you are able to master that, you just keep trying, and you kind of like identify with that part of yourself for the rest of your life. But what I've learned now, I can be all these different things. I can be, a craft beer lover, making my beers, like naming them, marking them. I can go and be a Taylor Swift crazy dance lover, trying to find all the Taylor Swift events that I can. I can be a writer. I can be a businesswoman. I can be a runner. Back then as a child, I didn't know I could be anything else. And maybe that was because of the culture that everyone was kind of pushing on me. I don't know. I don't feel like blaming everyone else. I know that I knew how to be a runner. And as a kid, I found out I knew what I could do and I wanted to do it. it's, but you grow, you evolve, and you realize there's more. And I think that's what happened when I decided the day before that race, my junior year, I wanted more.
Right.
I just wanted more.
Yeah, this was no longer just your identity. This wasn't going to be the only thing that defined you in that moment, and that's when you kind of make that conscious decision. One of the things I think is interesting, Davey, about this is Brandon and I talk a lot about this on the show, and we've had a lot of sports psychologists on. I know, you had spoken to like Josie Nicholson from University of Mississippi, and we've had Dana Charbonneau and Aaron Goodson and a bunch of sports psychologists. One of the things that we talk about with them is everyone, it's no different than normal society. Everybody's got something they're carrying with them. It's just with athletes, sometimes I think it gets masked to a degree because everybody assumes that everything is so good for them that, oh, well, they have this scholarship and they're playing this sport and everything's good. And we forget sometimes that they are just young athletes. Like it's just one thing that they do in life, but it doesn't mean that's where life stops, that they do have, to your point, some of the issues that you had going on in the background. And I think about these young ladies that, and are still young adults that, Lauren Burnett at JMU and Sarah Scholze, and you mentioned Katie Meyer earlier. And that's just the tip of the iceberg of some of the stories. But one of the things I'm wondering is, where did we go wrong? And the reason I ask this question is because I think back, Brandon and I played in the mid 90s. That's how dinosaur like we are, Yeah. You didn't even, it's amazing thinking though. And I think we had issues and things like that going on back then too, that were outside of the arena, whatever arena we were playing in. But it seems like now we're seeing more people take their own lives, or more people really maybe stepping forward with it than they ever did in the past. And I'm wondering, in your research, or kind of when I know you talked to a lot of people for this article, did you find some connector? Like, is it social media? Is it all of just normal social pressures that are going on right now that are just making it more magnified than normal?
Yes. So when I talk to sports psychologists and experts, it goes without saying that COVID-19 pandemic has drastically increased rates of anxiety and depression and suicidal thoughts. And so I think that's a huge part of it. I can't imagine what it was like being an athlete during the pandemic with, not being able to compete some seasons. You feel like you're running out of time, and, all the other logistics of like, were people able to redshirt or only certain people? I truly cannot imagine what it was like during this time. I think that was probably the biggest role that we're seeing these numbers go up. The second part of that, especially with more people speaking up, I think we're finally seeing professional athletes speak up.
Yep.
And that makes the world of a difference. It makes a world of a difference when they're doing it on a large scale before a large, race or performance or game. And then as far as it, the day to day and where did we go wrong, I don't think it's any one person's fault. I think it would help if, the world was kinder right now. And, it's not even just professors checking in on kids, it's students checking in on professors. Like, when we're getting back to life being in person, when we're able to read body language, when we're able to just be in the same room as someone, just asking how they are. I think some of us lost this, like, the capability to know what it's like to be social and interact in real time. And I don't know if I would be where I am today without the support of the professors during the time that I was at Xavier. Even when I was hospitalized, I had a professor calling the hospital, asking if I needed groceries when I got out. And that's like an extreme, but it made the world of it a difference. And knowing that, especially when you're in a hospital in that situation, knowing that someone outside of that like area cared, it told me, all right, get up, get out there, do what you need to do to get the help you need. But like, seriously, like, you have more to do. And that what put me there, I didn't think I had more to do. Or I didn't want more to do, or I really just felt worthless. Knowing that I wasn't, that matters. And, I did, as an athlete, you have certain benefits. Even after I left the team, professors still accommodated for me, whether that was because the Title IX office said they had to, or, I distinctly remember professors being like, oh yeah, you used to be on the track team. There's certain benefits with being an athlete. I'm not saying they're right. I'm just saying they exist. And it is maybe because there's a level of understanding that the pressures that athletes are seeing are different than normal students. I'm not saying normal students don't deserve accommodations. They absolutely do. That's part of the reason why every student is protected by Title IX. And there are mental health advocates on college campuses. I don't think every college has them, but it's something that every campus needs to work towards.
Well, Davey, this is a big issue because I think, to your point, there is a lot of mental health professionals on college campuses, or at least in the vicinity. But the one thing that I don't think people are talking enough about is, and I spoke with my son about this because he's a former college athlete, and he was like, Dad, yeah, there's hospitals and facilities within our student facilities and all that where we can go to these, but when are you going to have time? When do you have time in the normal schedule of a college athlete, which is so regimented, as waking up in the morning, you're going to classes, you got workouts, you have meetings and stuff like that. Like, it has to be a decision made by that athletic department that this is going to be a priority for us, that we are going to have a piece of our athletic department is going to be not only dedicated with likes of the, Dana Charbonneaus and all the sports psychologists and the folks that you talk to, but then they've got to be able to, the coaches have to be able to work in kind of concert with them to be able to say, hey, this is going to be a top priority for us. We're going to, whether it's weekly touch-ins, monthly touch-ins, whatever the case may be.
Yeah, they need to be treating it like they treat every strength session or handing in travel letters. Yeah. I wasn't allowed to go to the run race when I handed in travel letters late. If you're 10 minutes late to strength training, you're going on the Stairmaster. If you don't go to therapy, you're going on the Stairmaster. If I was a coach, that's what I'd be doing. And I do believe, the time schedule of a student athlete is strenuous, but there's time.
Yep.
If I found time to go to a party, there's time to go to therapy. Let's just put it that way. And I wasn't the only athlete going to a party. Right. So what I'm saying is, whether it's, coaches and athletic departments making it like, okay, this group of athletes, like Group A, goes to therapy this week, or even if it's just a select few, whatever it is, that's part of your training regimen. I wasn't offered a sports psychologist when I was at Xavier for how supportive my coach was, because I was already in counseling. I wasn't offered a sports psychologist. I do believe should have been with a sports psychologist since freshman year, right when I walked on campus, right after my first cross country season. There were rumors that, like, within the athletic community, we had it, but like no one had ever gone to it. And if they had, it wasn't helpful. So when that feedback's going around, I believe that coaches should tune in a little bit and give that feedback to the athletic department, because we are still, we pay for it. But whereas my school, they had like a graduate program for counseling at Xavier. So we had unlimited counseling. I got counseling because I was considered like a more priority urgent case because of like my panic attacks from the trauma that I was experiencing. But if like you just signed up, you might not get on that list for like another month to see one. And whereas I know for a fact other students at other universities, they actually get like 3 free sessions, and then they have to go and find it like with their insurance. So then you're dealing with, well, do these kids have transportation?
Right.
Like do these kids have insurance? It's a mess, and it's like across the board with mental health like that. I think if you're going to college, there should be mental health services. Mm-hmm. That's how I look at it. Yeah.
I agree. I agree. Well, listen, we can't thank you enough for joining us today. And I mean, this is a conversation that just continues. But I really appreciate about you, Davey, is that you, in doing my research, I saw you speaking to some board that at a Xavier, I don't know what it was. It was like if a dean was there or something, you were talking about sexual assault and in that conversation. You've just been somebody who's been a good advocate. And I think that's something we need more of, is individuals speaking up, finding their voice, and really making sure that they're not afraid to shed some light on some of these really big topics that for a long time we've just kind of shoved under the rug. So we really thank you for doing that. And I'd be remiss, guys, if we're talking about this, if we didn't take a moment to share the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, which is 1-800-273-8255. And if any of you listening to this have somebody that that's a college athlete, just college student in general, just check in on them from time to time. Ask how they're doing. You'd be surprised when you really start that conversation where it can lead you sometimes. So, Davey, we really thank you for taking the time to join us today.
Thank you so much. It was nice meeting you guys.
Nice meeting you.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Davey.
Take care.
All right.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Want to provide feedback or stay up to date with the show? Visit our Instagram page at Mental Advantage Podcast, or you can send us an email at podcast@mentaladvantage.net. To have John Cullen work with you or your team, please write to him at john.cullen@mentaladvantage.net. Thanks for listening to today's episode.